Good morning.
Good morning. It's good to see
Whoa,
you.
I've got my volume too.
I was just using my preacher voice so you could hear me.
I was told I needed to develop a preacher voice. Back many years ago in preaching class, when we had to preach in front of the whole classroom
Yeah.
and get evaluated, my number one complaint was my voice was too high,
Oh, I
which
hate that.
which
Oof,
was
don't.
an easy way to say you're a woman.
That's exactly it. Oh man, that's
Uh,
frustrating.
how's your week
Yeah.
been?
It's been all right. It's been pretty busy. We're finally I hoping we're getting some movement on construction on the house. So,
Wonderful.
it's just such a long process, you know. Um,
Well, the daughter in Santa Fe and her husband bought a house about 6 weeks ago, and
mhm,
they've lined up all kinds of stuff to be done in it.
mhm,
But Ryan is a rowing coach for crew rowing. He owns a rowing
mhm,
place.
mhm.
And he left the country for 3 months to do rowing camps all over the world.
Oh,
So
wow.
Lauren is now working full time, taking care of a baby, and having to keep up with all these workmen who are at the house.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, blessings for her. Golly, that's a lot. Um,
And as far
it,
away
it,
as you are from the house, it's hard for you to keep up with it.
uh,
I guess
oh
your
yeah.
parents are up
Well,
there, though.
yeah. So we do have, there's some flexibility, but like any one of those things you were just saying, taking care of a baby, working full time, any one of those is full time job. So that's like three
Yeah.
time jobs. Well,
Well, that's why Joe and I are spending the summer there. He's there now. We get to do the baby and cooking.
that's good. That's a good trade-off.
Yeah. Well, the
I'll take.
baby is. I'm not real fond of cooking, although when I get there, Lauren has a list of all the meals she wants me to cook that she's missed since moving to Santa Fe.
Oh, good. Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's hard to buy okra in Santa Fe.
Oh, I bet. Yeah. I really I I don't look forward to cooking, but when I do it, I really like it. It's one of those things. It's like whenever I actually get into it, I'm like, "Oh, this is actually kind of enjoyable." But
Well, I don't
yeah.
mind the cooking as much as the cleaning up, and I absolutely hate cleaning up
Yeah,
the kitchen.
I agree with that.
Or is
Yeah.
it
The
just
the
us
prep
again
and the
today?
cleanup, it may be. We're July, so I'm
Yeah,
not
I thought
shocked.
Miller and Rob would.
Um,
Ah, there's Camille. Hello. I thought Miller and
all right.
Rob might be back by
Hey
now.
folks. Yeah. Well, I'll go ahead and start. So we're at 10, so why don't we go ahead and get started? And again, we don't have to bear the burden of carrying the whole conversation till 11. But I've got a few things I wanted to share today. Because it's the feeding of the 5,000 story, which is one of my favorite stories. I guess, Paula, if you don't mind being the liturgist, I'll be voice of the people. And I'll do the Hebrew Bible reading if you'll do the New Testament reading, which is
Right.
the John version of the story.
I
So
love John.
I do too. We've had this conversation before, but I used to not like John that much. I really liked Mark because it's short and he's got the sarcastic language. But my friend Jamie Clark Souls, who's a John scholar, has helped kind of turn my opinion around. So
Well,
let
when I have had friends who have really had a hard time with the Bible, oh, where'd you
Oops.
go?
I'm sorry.
Oh,
I
who
I
have
should
really
should
had
have gone
time
to.
accepting anything in the Bible, if I can
Yeah.
get them to read John, they start to be a little more friendly to it.
Yeah. No, I hear that. Um, well, here we go. So whenever you're ready.
Okay. Today marks the feast days in the Lutheran and Episcopal churches of the church musicians Johann Sebastian Bach, George Friedrich Handel, Henry Purcell, and Heinrich Schultz. On tomorrow's date, in 587 BCE, the first temple of Jerusalem was destroyed by invading Babylonian forces. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Hear these words of invitation.
The hospitality of God knows no bounds.
The love of God is immeasurable.
The generosity of God is beyond our wildest dreams.
We gather today as invited ones,
As beloved ones,
as blessed ones.
draw near and let us break the bread of life.
From Psalms 145, 10 through 18. All that you have made gives thanks to you, Lord. All your faithful ones bless you.
They speak of the glory of your kingdom. They talk all about your power.
To inform all human beings about God's power and the majestic glory of God's kingdom.
Your kingdom is a kingship that lasts forever. Your rule endures for all generations.
The Lord is trustworthy in all that he says, faithful in all that he does.
The Lord supports all who fall down, straightens up all who are bent low.
All eyes look to you, hoping, and give them their food right on, and you give them their food right on time.
Opening your hand and satisfying the desire of every living thing.
The Lord is righteous in all his ways, faithful in all his deeds.
The Lord is close to everyone who calls out to him, to all who call out to him sincerely. Our Hebrew Bible reading is from 2 Kings 4:42 through 44. A man came from Baal Shalisha, bringing the man of God some bread from the early produce, 20 loaves of barley bread and fresh grain from his bag. Elisha said, "Give it to the people so they can eat." His servant said, "How can I feed 100 men with this?" Elisha said, "Give it to the people so they can eat. This is what the Lord says, eat and there will be leftovers." So the servant gave the food to them. They ate and had leftovers in agreement with the Lord's word.
John 6, 1 through 21. After this, Jesus went across the Galilee Sea, that is the Tiberias Sea. A large crowd followed him because they had seen the miraculous signs he had done among the sick. Jesus went up a mountain and sat there with his disciples. It was nearly time for Passover, the Jewish festival. Jesus looked up and saw the large crowd coming toward him. He asked Philip, "Where will we buy food to feed these people?" Jesus said this to test him, for he already knew what he was going to do. Philip replied, "More than a half year's salary worth of food wouldn't be enough for each person to have even a little bit." One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said, "A youth here has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what good is that for a crowd like this?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass there. They sat down, about 5,000 of them. Then Jesus took the bread. When he had given thanks, he distributed it to those who were sitting there. He did the same with the fish, each getting as much as they wanted. When they had plenty to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather up the leftover pieces so that nothing is wasted." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves that had been left over by those who had eaten. When the people saw that he had done a miraculous sign, they said, "This is truly the prophet who is coming into the world." Jesus understood that they were about to come and force him to be their king. So he took refuge again, alone on a mountain. When evening came, Jesus' disciples went down to the lake. They got into a boat and were crossing the lake to Capernaum. It was already getting dark, and Jesus hadn't come to them yet. The water was getting rough because a strong wind was blowing. When the wind had driven them out for about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the water, and he was approaching the boat, and they were afraid. He said to them, I am. Don't be afraid. Then they wanted to take him into the boat, and just then the boat reached the land where they had been heading. May God bless the hearing of this word.
Thanks be to God. Sorry, it's split over 2 pages there.
Okay, from Johann Sebastian Bach. Harmony is next to godliness, and all music should have no other end and aim than the glory of God and the soul's refreshment. Where this is not remembered, there is no real music, but only a devilish hubbub. The Episcopal prayer for the day includes the following: Be with all those who write or make music for your people, that we on earth may glimpse your beauty and know the inexhaustible riches of your new creation in Jesus Christ our Savior, who lives and reigns with you and the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever.
So thanks for getting us started, and thanks to those of you who are joining us online or on streaming on Facebook or YouTube. If you are watching on a streaming service, if you don't mind clicking like or just comment with where you're watching from, that gives us a way to count you today. We'll go into a time of prayer. I'll get us started, and those of you on Zoom, if you have any prayer requests, feel free to put them in the chat. If you're on Facebook or YouTube, feel free to put them in the comments. I'll try to track them. Although we don't have our usual complement of people, so we'll see what we can do.
I've
Let's
got Zoom.
You've got Zoom, great. Let's go to God in prayer. God, on this day that we commemorate musicians, those who give glory to you through sound, we give you thanks for the gift of music, for the ways that your creation praises you. Even the vibration of air, God, is able to stir something in us that calls to mind your. We remember with the psalmist how all creatures, all living beings on earth give glory to you. We marvel at the processes of life, that somehow there's such abundance and such fecundity that there is life over every square inch of this planet. We marvel at the gift that you bring us and remember Jesus' words that he came to bring us abundant life. God, we celebrate abundant life wherever it blossoms, and we lift up those places where life seems in short supply or is burdened. We lift up to you places of conflict, of hunger and pain, of addiction. We know their names, the names of these places and people from all the bad news that we see regularly. Yet you are the God of good news. And just like today's story, you proclaim abundance where we see only scarcity, and you proclaim life where we see only death. We lift up to you ourselves and our own brokenness and hurt. We lift up to you both our praises and our pleas. And I invite those of you who are listening to share your prayer requests.
From Camille for the housing and care of the elderly.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For Jenny Lawler.
Lord, hear our prayer. Traveling mercies for Angela as she goes to North Carolina for the funeral of her uncle.
Lord, hear our prayer. For Daryl Hardy.
Lord, hear our prayer. For our neighbors, the Petruccis.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For those being
Okay.
affected, go ahead.
For peace in the Middle East.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For those being affected by rampant fires.
Lord, hear our prayer.
for reconciliation among family members,
Lord, hear our prayer.
for work for the unemployed,
Lord, hear our prayer. For a church that would be more concerned about helping neighbors than its own political grievances.
Lord, hear our prayer.
God, for the prayers, excuse me, for the prayers that we've named and the prayers that we don't know how to put into words, we give you thanks that you hear and that you answer. And we join with Jesus in the prayer that he taught us. Holy One, our Mother and Father, let your name be revered. Let your reign come. Let your will be done on the earth as it is in the heavens. Give us today the bread we need for today, and forgive our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from the time of trial and deliver us from evil. For yours is the sovereignty, the power, and the glory, now and forever. Amen.
Amen.
So I wanted to share a little bit about this the story that we hear in the New Testament, the famous feeding of the 5,000. Um, a lot of times when we hear this story, we hear it in isolation. We don't realize that there's a precedent. The one that the Hebrew Bible reading tells the story about Elisha doing a similar kind of miracle where there was way more people than he expected that he could feed with just a handful of bread. And similarly, he says to his servant, "Feed the folks, give it to them so they can eat." And his servant replies, "How can I feed 100 men with this?" And Elisha just repeats himself, "Give it to the people so they can eat." And then he says, "Do this and there will be leftovers." Similarly, in the New Testament story, Jesus is in the John story, he's a little bit more playful. He asks Philip, "Where will we buy food to feed all these people?" And John has this little editorial comment. Jesus was kind of toying with John. He knew what he was going to do. And it's kind of like an aside whisper, right? In some of the other gospels, it's usually the disciples that first say, "These people are going to be hungry. How are we going to feed all these people?" And Jesus says, "Give them something." Here, Jesus is the instigator, and he's the one kind of pushing the action forward. Now, a lot of times when we talk about this story, um, people kind of get hung up on the magic of the miracle. Like, how did this happen? And we've talked before about this miracle, and sometimes people like to bring up the theory that maybe people had brought things with them, and they decided to all share once they saw one person share. That's a reasonable explanation. I think though when we get hung up on the miracle, we kind of miss the point. And to talk a little bit about the point, I want to take a couple of steps back, and I'm going to talk about something that may seem completely irrelevant. I want to talk about um, the Hindu perspective of karma. Uh, this is from the Bhagavad Gita, which is a holy book to Hindus, but they talk about karma. Now, usually when we hear the word karma in the West, we think about it as sort of a cosmic ledger. Like if you do bad things are going to happen to you. If you go on the internet and you look up videos of instant karma, usually you'll see someone doing something boneheaded or mean, and then immediately something bad happens to them. Like they're pushing a wheelbarrow down the hill, they yell something foul at somebody else, and then they wind up in the wheelbarrow rolling down the hill. Something like that, right? Instant karma. We like the idea that bad people get their comeuppance and that good people have a reward. The idea behind karma, though, is a little bit more nuanced than that. It's not so much that there's a cosmic ledger where, uh, you know, God or the gods are keeping track of your good deeds and bad deeds. It's more like what you put out into the world, you will get back. So if you are, we have a saying, what goes around comes around. if you do things that are in keeping with virtue, that nice things will generally happen to you. We understand that's not a one-to-one equivalent, but we do know that what goes around comes around. You kind of create the world that you want. If you are stingy and mean, you will tend to see scarcity. If you are generous and open-hearted, you will tend to see abundance. But there's something else that's important in the Hindu version of karma, which is that the the goal is not for you to do good things and get good rewards. The goal is for you to get outside the system of karma. In fact, what you're trying to do is separate whatever reward you hope for from the deed. The idea is to not be attached to the consequences of what happens. Um, this is uh, this is from the Bhagavad Gita. Um, the Lord Krishna is speaking. He says, "They live in freedom who have gone beyond the dualities of life. Competing with no one, they are alike in success and failure, and content with whatever comes to them. They are free, without selfish attachments. Their minds are fixed in knowledge. They perform all work in the spirit of service, and their karma is dissolved." So the idea is kind of if you approach this with the right attitude, with an attitude of service, and you're not hung up on the outcome, then good deeds and bad deeds, the outcome is no longer important. The karma is dissolved. Another place he says, whatever you do, this is essentially God speaking, whatever you do, make it an offering to me. The food you eat, the sacrifices you make, the help you give, even your suffering. In this way, you will be freed from the bondage of karma and from its results, both pleasant and painful. So the idea is to break out of the reward system. The idea of a reward system is like a trap. Once you buy into it, it has you locked into it, right? And the idea is to act as though the consequences don't matter. To be able to act in such a way with such freedom that you're not worried about the outcome. And the reason I bring this up is because I think we get lost in the fact that, wow, Jesus fed 5,000 people here, or Elisha fed 100 people here, instead of what actually happens in the story, which is that Jesus or Elisha say, do this thing, do this good thing, share this food. And our response, the response of the disciples, the response of the servant in the Elisha story is, that won't work. And I think that's the point. That's where the story hinges, right? It's that's not going to work. For Elisha's servant, there's no way we can feed 100 people with this food, right? For Philip, it's like we can't, there's no way we could buy enough here. And then Simon Peter or Andrew comes along and says, well, we got this much, but it will never spread among all these people. And I like to think about the fact that there's two concerns expressed there, right? The first one is we won't succeed. If we share, we will fail. Like if we start doing this good action, we won't be able to bring it to completion. We won't succeed. So one of the concerns is we're going to fail. We'll start doing this and we'll run out. We won't be able to do it. The second concern is that somehow it won't be fair, right? Like if we start doing something good, we have to do it for everybody or else it won't be fair. And when I think about the things that get in the way of us doing the things that we should do, those are frequently the most common things. We're either going to fail at it or somehow it won't be fair and we will be perceived as bad. Right? I mean, I think about, frequently the objection to sharing food or to helping someone who's homeless or to whatever is that it's not going to do any good. Right? If I do this little bit of good, it's not going to be enough. And I suspect that taps into something like an existential anxiety that we have, like we are not enough. I mean, I'm not good enough, or I can't do enough, or I can never be enough. And I think it taps into something really primal about who we are and how we think we measure up in the world. That our fear of not being enough or doing enough gets in the way of us doing anything at all. One of the places I see this happen, especially, is in Alabama, in politics, in voting. Why bother voting when my vote's not going to count for anything, right? And I almost feel like why bother should be the disciples' slogans here. Like, why should we even try? And what I get out of this story is we are hung up on the consequences. We're hung up on the outcomes or on what we're going to be able to achieve. We're afraid of failure instead of the idea that regardless of the outcome, do what you're supposed to do. Make the effort. Now, of course, to be a good story, it's not going to end with failure, but I like to imagine the possible outcomes if Jesus hadn't done divine magic here, right? If they had just taken a few the kids fish and bread and they had shared it among a few people, like what were the feared outcomes, right? A bunch of people being angry. Hey, it's not fair, right? All the people you couldn't feed, maybe they would be mad at you, right? Or maybe everyone would have just such a little amount that it was just enough to stir up their hunger. Like, oh, we just had appetizers and now we're hungrier. Now it's worse, right? Or what would have happened? Would they have lost credibility in the eyes of other people? See, all of those are worries about myself. People are going to be mad at me. It's not going to be enough, and then I'm going to feel bad. Instead of, this is what needs to happen. There's a need, and I'm going to try to meet it. So the outcome for both of these, of course, is that people get fed and that there's plenty of leftover. And I like to think instead of this being that people had food stashed under their coats or that Jesus miracled more food into existence, I like to think that this is just what happens when you don't care about karma anymore. When I'm not worried about the outcome and I just do what's supposed to be done, suddenly things break loose, right? Suddenly I become aware that there's more here than my scarcity or my lack. That there's something else going on here that I don't see. And again, I don't want to just boil it down to God does magic and then there's more food, or that God rewards my faithfulness, rewards my good works with more karma. I think there's something about not caring about the outcome that actually makes us have good outcomes. And I wonder what it would be like as followers of Jesus if we were less concerned about the outcome. I mean, I got up today and I met with a handful of you online because I'm not really worried about having a big church, you know? That part of this is not about, the outcomes. It's not about, oh man, we reached lots of people and we got lots of money and we were able to, do. It's not about that. That faithfulness is about sharing what you've got. And that my goal as a pastor is to share what I've got. And I wonder what would happen like globally if everyone did that, if we voted regardless of feeling overwhelmed or like there's no point, that my efforts or my work wasn't ever going to be enough. I wonder what God could do with that action. So that's where I land on today's story. I'd be curious to hear y'all's responses to it.
I think the little boy in the story is a perfect example of what you're talking about. Here's this 12 little, or well, we say 12, I don't, this young kid, youth,
Yeah,
who, who says, hey, I have lunch, I'll share it with all
yeah,
those people around him. He wasn't thinking about what the outcome would be. he just opened his heart to share. And I think that might be the biggest miracle in the story because
Mm,
you don't see too many other people volunteering.
right.
Uh, and I know I've probably shared this before because it's my favorite quote in the whole world. I got voted most likely to succeed in high school, which is a hoot because I have failed more than anybody I've ever known. But Winston Churchill said that success is the ability to fail repeatedly and get back up and start again without lack of enthusiasm,
Mm,
which is, that's got success and failure tied in together as part of the same thing. And I love that.
hmm
And the whole ledger book type thing. If I do the right thing, I'll get rewarded. Well, first of
hmm
all, you need to do the right thing because it's the right thing.
Right.
But
hmm
I have heard the whole thing about forgiveness so distorted in my life. That forgiven you shall be forgiven is
hmm
God is not going to forgive you if you don't forgive other people.
hmm
And I think it's more if you're able to forgive other people, then you're also able to receive forgiveness.
hmm
And it's the hardest thing in the world to receive forgiveness. There's another quote that says something about when somebody hurts you, he'll never forgive you.
hmm
And yeah, when you've done something to somebody intentionally to hurt them, you don't want to be forgiven. It makes you angry
Exactly.
to be forgiven. And
Exactly.
so, you forgive not so God will forgive you, but just because you're able to forgive, you're also able to accept forgiveness. And now I'll
Yeah.
shut up.
No, I think you're right on. I like the way you tie that into forgiveness. You're absolutely right. When someone offers you forgiveness, if you are not someone who forgives, then you feel like, well, how dare they, you know, how dare they forgive me, right? Um, forgiving other people make puts you kind of in the same boat. It's like we're all in the same boat. We all need the same
Yes.
things, and it requires that generosity of spirit that you exercise for then you to be able to turn around and say, "Oh, thank you for your forgiveness," right? I think you're right. I think in the same way, like this, I guess my concern in this story is that if we think about it as do this and God will reward you, like we're right back into the ledger system. When I think part of what Jesus is showing here is like, we're not worried about outcomes. Just share it, you know? And it's that not caring about the outcome that makes a good outcome, ironically. But it's about being free from that system.
And that
Absolutely.
rolls right into politics. So many
hmm
people vote based on what they think is going to make their own life easier
hmm
and to hell with the rest of the people
hmm
instead of what is best for the citizenship as a whole
hmm hmm
and what will lift up those on the bottom of the social order.
Right.
Uh, Now, we are very selfish humans.
Yeah. Well, thinking about like the idea that being stingy comes from a perception of scarcity
Hmm.
instead of seeing abundance, and that this really is an error of seeing or understanding. Like there is an abundance. Um, just like we've got plenty of food in the world to feed everybody. What we have is a distribution problem, not a scarcity problem. Um, yeah. I see. So when Aleem quotes Rumi, move from within, don't move the way fear wants, begin a foolish project. Noah did. I like that.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. Well, again, being motivated by, what you know is right, or being motivated by a generosity of spirit rather than uh being afraid, not doing what fear wants. Yeah.
And Camille says, I wonder if the people understood there wasn't a lot of food in the baskets. And either passed it on or added to it, with those who really needed food being those who were fed.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, I mean, it's possible that seeing a model of generosity, other people decided to be generous. I mean, I think that's, that's one way that we explain the miracle. Um, but I do feel like I don't want to get too locked into that way of seeing it because I think part of it is like just acting without worry. That like they didn't know that would happen, right? So someone had to move first, right? So I like that. Anyway,
Miriam says, remember Y2K? There were those who stashed for themselves and those who stored up in order to feed others. And
absolutely.
there were those of us who didn't worry about it and just went on about our life and figured what
Yeah.
will happen.
Yeah.
And
Or
come,
the run on toilet paper during COVID, right? That
oh,
was like like
my mother would have said when she was growing up, there was no toilet paper. They used leaves.
yeah.
And we're not going to run, well, we may run out of those. I'll shut
Or
up
the
about that.
and they don't sell
Camille,
they don't do yellow pages anymore, so you can't use the yellow
oh, I
pages. So
know. Our Sears catalogs.
right.
Camille says when someone has been forgiven and then gets mad, it may mean they don't
Hmm.
feel they have done anything that they need to be forgiven for.
Hmm.
So they feel like, who are you to forgive me? You're the one who needs to be forgiven.
Exactly. Forgiveness becomes a game of one-upmanship rather than a generosity of, I'm going to let go of the consequences of this, whatever it happens to be, or I'm going to let go of the bitterness about, this didn't turn out the way I wanted to. Definitely.
Well, I'm going to
Appreciate
go
that.
back and say I wasn't that virtuous during Y2K. My daughter was on the team at Alabama Power who
Uh-huh.
was preparing for it.
Uh-huh.
And she said the week before Y2K happened, they shut down everything in Alabama Power and rebooted it again. And out of everything in that Alabama Power building, which goes 10 stories underground too,
Hmm.
one laptop didn't come back on.
Right.
So she told me, don't worry about it. And I
Yeah.
didn't.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think so kind of what I want to come back to on this is um a, a lot of the times when when we are, and I think this is difficult to remember because I see it in other people way before I see it in myself, that most of the time the reason that we don't do what we're asked to do or do what we know should be done is because we're afraid either of the outcome, it's not going to go the way I want, or that we won't be enough. Like it's not going to make a difference. That hopelessness, I mean, I really do feel like hopelessness is one of the biggest obstacles to discipleship or to virtue, however we want to talk about it. Like that's not going to do any good. It's that attitude, right? That's not going to make a difference. Um, that we feel like, that's what causes our sense of scarcity. It's this that attachment to the outcome.
Well,
Um,
and hope is the basis of nearly every important Bible story. I mean,
mhm,
Noah built a ark because he had hope. Hannah prayed for a child because she
mhm.
had hope. Over and over, that hope kept them going till something actually did happen.
Yeah, yeah.
And
And
it
I
didn't
think,
have to be miraculous. I mean, Hannah got
right.
pregnant. A lot of people get pregnant later in life.
Yeah,
Uh,
right. Absolutely. It was only perceived to be a miracle because it was unusual at that point. It was not, yeah.
well,
And
my daughter had her first baby at 44, so
yeah,
it's real
yeah.
common these days.
Oh, and I want again, I think you're right. I think hopelessness is um a lot of times what holds us back from doing the things that we're called to do or from being generous. It's a sense of hopelessness. It's not going to make a difference. Um, Rebecca Solnit is probably she's an author, has written a lot of stuff about hope, and is does a lot of stuff online, and she talks about especially regarding politics and kind of the political season we're in and that kind of stuff, that um, hopelessness is really the easy way out, right? Because then you don't have to do anything. And when I hear the disciples in this passage, that's what I'm thinking. Like they're looking for the easy way out, right? If I don't have to share, right, then I don't fail. So,
I think I'm using hopelessness as an excuse these days. Uh, I have extremely bad arthritis in my back and I'm in constant pain.
mhm.
And the doctors have told me I need to lose weight. And there's this very strong part of me that says, you're almost 73 years old. It's not going to do any good. You're not going to be here much longer.
Mhm.
And I haven't done anything as far
Oh,
of my tail and do. And I think I lost you.
you faded out there for just a minute. You said you mentioned your age, and then I lost you after that.
Oh, I said I'm almost 73 and I'm not going to be around a lot longer. And the hopelessness in me says, why bother,
Mhm.
trying to start exercising now? It's not going to keep you alive much longer anyway. It might help keep me out of pain though.
Right, right. Right, and that's part of like what are you hoping for, right? It's like if, it may not add a whole lot to your longevity, but it certainly might change the quality of your life, I think. Um, yeah.
I'm basically lazy though.
Well, I mean, aren't we all? If I have a choice between, busting my butt for something and not, I will often choose not. Um, I like Rebecca Solnit says, I like this quote, hope is an embrace of the unknown. Um, and that's, I think, I love that statement. Yeah, it's an embrace of the unknown. It really is a leap of faith. You're jumping out into something you don't know that's going to happen, that's going to go your way. Uh, any other comments or statements about either the story or what we've shared today? So I'm looking on YouTube and Facebook, so just to make sure that
Uh,
I'm not missing
Miriam,
anything.
Miriam just said, communing here each week gives me hope.
Oh, thank you for that. Um, I just want to lift up because this is pretty funny from on YouTube. Giant Robots Conquer the World said, as far as how the miracle happened, I'm not Jesus's math teacher and don't need him to show his work. I appreciate that. Um, and I'm not sure. So I'm having to, because I'm trying to not use up so much bandwidth, I'm having to switch back and forth on my phone, and sometimes all the comments that come previously don't show up. So if I've missed anyone, my apologies. Um, but I feel like that might be a good place to wrap it up today. So July is generally low attendance time in church as we have a smaller crew, but I feel like we've talked well about this passage, and I hope you have opportunity to see it not just in church but in your life during the week. Um, Let me go ahead and share up our closing prayer, and if you don't mind reading that for
From
us.
Francis of Assisi. May most high, omnipotent, righteous Lord, to you be all praise, glory, the honor, and all blessing. Praise be to you, my Lord, for Sister Moon and the stars in heaven. You fashion them clear and precious and beautiful. Praise be to you, my Lord, for those who forgive sin in your love, who forgive sins in your love, and for those who bear with sickness and tribulation. Blessed are those who endure in peace, for by you, Most High Lord, they will be crowned. Amen.
God is love, nothing is wasted, all things shall be well. Go in peace. So thanks to those of you who've been streaming. If you're on Facebook or YouTube, if you don't mind, again, just clicking like or commenting with where you're watching from, that to give us a way of counting you. Grateful for your grateful that you joined us today. If you're on Zoom, excuse me, I'm going to stop the stream. If you're on Zoom, stick around for just a moment and just a moment more.